Today, we're stepping into the complex labyrinth of Venezuela, a nation that's been at the center of global attention for years. Using expert analysis, we're going to try and untangle some of the powerful forces that have shaped its present and will almost certainly define its future.
Okay, let's start with this quote. It's hypothetical, sure, but it immediately sets a really intense scene. This isn't some distant conflict. The message is clear. This is happening right in America's backyard, and that changes all the rules.
And this idea, this hypothetical event, is really the lens we're going to be looking through. We're using it to unpack a much bigger question. What kind of history could possibly lead to a moment like that? And what would the fallout even look like?
And that really is the billion-dollar question, isn't it? I mean, Venezuela is sitting on more oil than Saudi Arabia. So how did it end up here? Well, the answer is a really tangled story of power, politics, and identity. And we're going to pull on those threads one by one.
So, to find our way, we have to start by entering the labyrinth itself. And our journey begins with the political movement that has defined Venezuela for more than 20 years, Chavismo. This is where the walls of the maze were built. You can really see just how fast things changed. In 1998, Hugo Chavez comes to power democratically, riding this huge wave of popular anger. But then he uses the very tools of democracy, like constitutional reforms, to systematically concentrate power, take control of the media, and totally reshape the country's political landscape, a path his successor, Maduro, would follow. Now, our academic sources actually have a term for this: endogenous institutional change. Yeah, I know, it sounds a little technical, but the idea is absolutely crucial. This wasn't some kind of violent coup from the outside. It was a slow, methodical takeover of the system from within, using the system's own rules against itself. And this shows you exactly how that works. It's a feedback loop. You gain power, which lets you change the rules. Changing the rules lets you get even more political control, and then that new control lets you consolidate even more power. It's like a political engine that's designed to just keep running and running.
But, just talking about the political mechanics of it all kind of misses the point. To really get what happened, you have to look at the deeper, more powerful currents running through Venezuelan society. We have to talk about the often unspoken, but deeply felt, divides of race and class.
So there's this huge contradiction at the heart of it all. For decades, Venezuela had this national myth of itself as a racial democracy, a perfectly blended coffee-with-milk society where race just didn't matter. But the reality our sources point to is, well, it's completely different. It's a society where a very small, mostly white elite has always held nearly all the power and wealth.
And a quote like this is just so jarring. It makes that abstract idea of racial tension feel shockingly real. This wasn't just political disagreement. It was a visceral, racist reaction from the old establishment, and it just ripped the mask off that myth of racial harmony.
And Chavez, who is a brilliant politician, he took those insults and he completely turned them into a source of strength. By proudly embracing his mixed-race identity, calling himself Indian and black, he built this incredibly powerful bond with millions of Venezuelans who felt like they had been ignored by the elites for generations. Finally, they saw someone who looked like them in power.
Now, all of this internal turmoil and anti-establishment feeling, it didn't go unnoticed on the world stage. In fact, it created a huge strategic opening for other global powers, which brings us to the Iran-Hezbollah connection.
According to analysis from the Atlantic Council, this alliance is basically a classic case of the enemy of my enemy is my friend. They're both united by oil, by Western sanctions, and by a shared opposition to the United States. And they've built this deep partnership that goes from things like alleged gold smuggling all the way to Venezuela becoming a strategic hub for Iran's proxies, like Hezbollah.
And that right there is why our whole hypothetical scenario matters so much on a global scale. Taking out Maduro wouldn't just be a regime change. It would send a seismic shock through Iran's entire strategic setup in the Americas, disrupting financial networks, intelligence, and all sorts of operations.
Because at the end of the day, all of these political games, all these geopolitical moves, they're all funded and fueled by the one thing that has defined Venezuela for over a century: it's oil.
Okay, just think about this number for a second. Back in the 90s, Venezuela was pumping out about 3.5 million barrels of oil every single day. It was a true energy superpower, a giant on the world market.
And the fall from that peak has been nothing short of catastrophic. I mean, after decades of political chaos, mismanagement, and just crushing sanctions, production has totally collapsed to less than 1 million barrels a day. The economic engine of the country has been completely hollowed out.
So, could it ever recover? Well, models from Oxford Economics paint a pretty sober picture. Even in a really optimistic post-Maduro scenario, where sanctions get lifted and investment comes back, production might only get back to around 2 million barrels a day by 2028, which, hey, that's a huge improvement, but it's still a far cry from its former glory days.
And here's the real takeaway. Just turning the oil taps back on, it's not a silver bullet. The sources are really clear on this. A true, lasting recovery for the whole country means rebuilding everything else that's crumbled: the courts, the schools, the roads, the rule of law. And that is the work of a generation.
So that leaves us with one final, very challenging thought. When a country's crisis is a labyrinth built from these interlocking walls of political power, racial division, and oil dependency, where do you even begin to fix it? Which thread do you pull on first, knowing that tugging on one is going to move all the others? There really is no easy answer.